The NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast is your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice and more. For more coverage, visit NHL.com/fantasy. And now here's Pete Jensen and Nick Alberga to help you guide you through this week.
Thanks. Happy New Year, everybody. We're starting off a clean slate in the fantasy side of things and trying to navigate everything to do with COVID and whatnot. So Pete and Nick here with you, taking a look at the waiver wire top 10 and a couple of guys that jump out to us. Tanner Jeannot for the Nashville Predators, really bursting onto the scene among rookies, tied for the rookie lead, Nick, in goals and also leading all rookies in hits.
That's right. We're headed to Music City, and you look at just how hot Tanner Jeannot and the Nashville Predators in general, Pete, have been. It's been a rather surprising development, if you ask me. And Jeannot was specifically the fact that he has 10 goals in 33 games, on pace for 25. And this is a guy who's being used minimally on the power play, which I think is an interesting thing for me as well. He's Mr. Even Strength this year, but a great story nonetheless, isn't he?
Yeah, you wonder, a lot of people always look for top six exposure and or first power play. He's not even on the second power play, and he's playing on the third line. But Nashville, one of the most surprisingly competitive teams in the whole league, and they run things as deep as their third line this season. Robert Thomas is another guy, right? We've been beating the drum on this guy for a couple of weeks now. He's close to a point per game, Nick, for one of the deepest offenses in the whole league in St. Louis.
Pete, he was perfect for the Winter Classic because he's hot, and that place is really, really cold. You look at that line in general with Kyrou, Tarasenko, Robert Thomas. You're right on Thomas, under 30% ownership as we speak right now in standard leagues. A goal and 2 helpers in 2 games since returning from a 7-game hiatus. He has 25 points in 26 games, which not many people are talking about. He's on PP2 as well. And in general, we just really, really like the depth of the St. Louis Blues this season. So yes, we're all over them. Speaking of that, a former St. Louis Blue, Pete, Paul Stasny with the Winnipeg Jets in the top line, and he's been doing some damage lately, hasn't he?
He has, for sure. He's bringing exposure to Nikolai Ehlers and Mark Scheifele these days, and he's got 4 points in his past 2 games. Of course, there was a big break in between, but one thing we always look at is ice time, and he's averaging more than 17 and a half minutes per game on the season at large, and Winnipeg also an extremely potent offense. And yeah, one other thing on Robert Thomas that I worry about is that Braden Shen is coming back from injury. He's actually been activated last we checked today off IR. So that offense gets even deeper. But sometimes, right, Nick, like you just look for these great teams and high octane offenses and you try to get a piece of them any way that you can.
Yeah, there's too much depth in St. Louis. From there, Pete, we go to our final look in the waiver wire, and not so much in terms of depth, but Arizona, Phil Kessel. Do you think he wants to get traded? There's a potential between now and March 21st. He'll be on the move, but he's actually quietly been on fire. He's notched at least a point in 13 of the last 16 games, 16 points in the last 16. And this is playing with Lawson Krause and Johan Larsson and PP2. So Phil Kessel could put himself in a prime position to join a contender at the deadline, Pete.
Right, you could see him join a contender and maybe play with an elite centerman somewhere else. But even in the meantime, it doesn't matter that Arizona's at the bottom of the league standings. Yeah. Since December 11th, they're actually, as a team, second most goals per game in the NHL, 4.5 per game. And that included a 7-goal loss when they lost 8-7 to the San Jose Sharks. And Kessel had 4 assists in that game. Also, if you're in a more shallow league, you got to look at what Clayton Keller's doing from that same sneaky Coyotes offense right now.
They're covering spreads as well. Jacob Chikrin, don't sleep on that name. Looks like he could return to that lineup as soon as this week. Let's get to some listener questions via social media and Instagram. Jack Hughes or Patrick Laine? This coming from Miguel. Where do you lead with this?
So we just did the top 100 forward rankings for fantasy on NHL.com/fantasy today. So I took this question and I put it into the rankings. So we got Jack Hughes a couple of spots higher than Patrick Laine. I know that Laine has had the higher ceiling in his career to this point, Nick, but you look at what Hughes is doing lately, 3 straight multi-point games. All of a sudden, you look at him in an entirely different light. You start talking about the upside that we were so excited for him to have a full-fledged breakout season. And he's got 16 points in 16 games on the season. So it is not far-fetched at all to expect Jack Hughes to produce a point per game or better from this point till the end of the regular season.
And just to play devil's advocate as well, Jacob Voracek, what he's been doing throughout this season with Patrick Laine, don't sleep on that. But certainly when you look at New Jersey, that trio's intact. And we're looking at Igor Sharangovich. You want to talk about the waiver wire. How about another name just for you? 4-game point streak, 3 goals and 1 assist, playing with Broughton Hughes, and a 3-game week here, Pete, for the New Jersey Devils.
Yeah, I like what the Devils are bringing in general in terms of their youth movement and extending Hughes for the long term. I think it was the right move. It was a little bold at the time to get it done, but again, the upside is so high. And one other thing about Sharangovich, tri-eligible in Yahoo League, center, left wing, right wing. So you always love to see that for fantasy flexibility. And then another fan question, people are asking and chirping right now about Cam Talbot. He was struggling, right? He allowed 12 goals over his past 2 games, including that early exit in the Winter Classic. Turns out he's dealing with some sort of an injury, and he's not going to be playing in Minnesota's next start, so against the Bruins. So Cam Talbot, a fade. It depends on how you look at it, right? It could be a buy low, maybe window. Personally, I'm looking at Kaapo Kähkönen as 20% rostered as a good streaming option, Nick, at a time where slim pickings, to say the least, right now on the goalie waiver wire.
Yeah, I think in general, now is the time to buy on the Minnesota Wild, Pete. I think you just look at what this team has put forward throughout this season, the fact of what they have already on that roster, the fact that they're building, and it's, of course, with Kähkönen and
Yeah, so Kähkönen has really had a great career record, 23-11-2 in his young NHL career. And outside goalie replacements you have to consider as well with Cam Talbot out of the mix, at least in the short term. Laurent Brossoit getting some work for the Vegas Golden Knights in the absence of Robin Lehner because of injury. And one guy that I've had a lot of patience with this year, it paid off the other day. Spencer Knight had a great performance as a rookie against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm still hanging tough with Spencer Knight, and I would pick up Spencer Knight if he was available to replace or at least be a stopgap for Cam Talbot, who's injured. So back to you guys.